to find a middle ground that's good for everybody. I don't want to deprive some hunter of something. I'm not sure they need an AR-15 to go hunting with, frankly.
Or hunting, but that's another thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if we don't address to say that we're pro-life, and we want to deny a woman a right to have an abortion, but pro-life ends once they're born and a child isn't important, is crazy. What is your position? What will you try to do to bridge the gap?
The day after Uvalde, I dropped my kids off at school on Wednesday morning, and there were 19 families in Texas that didn't have the opportunity to do that. There have been 27 school shootings, not since the beginning of the school year, since January. Just last week alone, we had a guy in Florence shooting at cars on the interstate, hit an 8-year-old child from New Hampshire who was vacationing in the neck, and he died. Last week we had 2 shootings in North Charleston, one on Memorial Day that night, 13 people injured, 3 of them including law enforcement, 10 bystanders, civilians who didn't deserve that at all. Then we had another shooting in North Charleston that Wednesday morning, I believe, and then in April 26th in North Charleston at Pepper Hill, there were over 30 shots fired. It sounded like APC in the parking lot next to a Little League game, and we all saw the video of kids crawling off the baseball field. As a constitutionalist, I understand law-abiding citizens' rights and all that, but there are ways, and there are federal issues, there are state, and then there are local. I started working on this issue as a state lawmaker in 2018. Now, I represent Mother Emanuel, and there was a bill called the Charleston loophole that everyone was very excited about, but would not have prevented someone like Dylan Rue from actually buying a gun. And if you talk to people on both sides off the record, they would admit that. And so I worked on a bill after it would not have prevented him from getting a gun, and I'll tell you why. So when Parkland, Florida happened, I did a lot of research, and it turns out in the state of South Carolina, our data, criminal data, people committing crimes, state troopers have their own database, they don't share it with anyone. Counties, municipalities, towns, cities, SLED, they have their own database. Juvenile justice has their own database. DNR, when a criminal goes to buy their hunting license or their fishing license, they use the right mailing address for where they live, and people do commit crimes, and DNR does charge people and arrest people. But our data in South Carolina, as is the case with most states, except for North Carolina, they have a software program called CJ Leads that puts all this information in one place. In our Fusion Center at SLED, it's optional. You don't have to, you're not required to put that information in there. So I drafted a bill. I talked to Marquille, I talked to SLED, I talked to all of our law enforcement elected officials, because when you're whipping votes and trying to get funding for a bill, you want to make sure that your folks who support law enforcement are going to be on the bill and be supportive. I whipped the votes. I had about $8 million dedicated to putting a prototype together in the 2018 budget, and it got killed by one person, a state rep from Somerville, whose name I cannot name right now because it's too political, killed the bill. And so that's just one example of where most states, when you have someone committing a crime like the kid in Uvalde, literally shooting people with a BB gun in the days leading up to this, law enforcement knew about it, should have never been allowed to buy a gun. And as is the case with most states in this country, they don't put the information about people committing crimes, criminals, into a single place where in 30 seconds you should be able to pull up somebody's criminal record. Somebody like Dylan Roof, and when the FBI reached out, as we all know, the FBI reached out to the wrong jurisdiction. Come to find out, I get sworn in January 2021. Dan and I have this conversation. When the FBI or any federal agency wants to communicate criminal information, people committing crimes to state and local agencies, you know what they're only allowed to use? A fax machine. And so it's just 2022. We should be using electronic communications, telephones, internet, email, you name it. That's just a start. We're not even doing the bare minimum, and that is the absolute bare minimum we should be doing. When a bad guy tries to go get a gun, we should know within 30 seconds whether or not they have the right to do that. Every time I go and buy a firearm, and I have 7, I get a background check. I am checked every time I go and buy a gun. And I don't mind it. I have nothing to hide from that perspective. And so these are issues that I wrote about after Uvalde. There are other things that I believe we should be doing. Hardening our schools has to be an option. I also believe, and South Carolina did this when I was a state lawmaker, I don't know if they've done it this budget cycle, but you know, teachers, their pay is renewed every year. But I know in 18 or 19, we fully funded, for example, mental health counselors in all of our schools. We need to make sure some schools need more than one. We've had a 70% increase in online bullying in the last 2 years with COVID-19. We know that oftentimes these shooters, they've been bullied in school, they've been reported to law enforcement. What is the mechanism? One of the things we do with the President of the United States is he has a threat matrix. The Secret Service has a threat matrix. Why are we not giving funding and resources to our law enforcement? Because oftentimes, like Colts Nightclub and other shooters, they're known to law enforcement. Why do we not have threat matrix for these people, and so we can be sure we're protecting our communities? That's another idea that I've thrown out there. But there are ways where I think we can find that middle ground. And this is like, I'm talking about bare minimum stuff. So we'll see what happens this week. The other thing that I've supported in the past are fully funding SROs or armed school resource officers in our schools. That is a good thing, but we've seen in some cases where they have run away from the fire rather than toward it. But this is a